Since the late 1980s, when pastors from various Protestant denominations began to organize efforts, protection persuasion began to be carried out on a nationwide scale, and many Unification Church members suddenly disappeared one day, has become more frequent. The origin of protection persuasion. When on earth did this kind of barbaric abduction and confinement begin? If there is a history of abduction and confinement, it is probably a dark history in which believers were isolated and hospitalized in mental hospitals. According to research by lawyer Tadayoshi Ueno, 17 believers had been forcibly admitted to psychiatric hospitals by 1986. Since at least 6 people were admitted to the same hospital, there is a strong suspicion that this was an organized crime. In the late 1980s, mental hospital admissions began to recede, but forced persuasion by pastors began to increase to replace them. The pioneer of this movement was Satoshi Moriyama, deceased, pastor of the evangelical Ajakubo Eiko Church, Tokyo. He is known for challenging Christian believers, including the Unification Church, Mormonism, and Jehovah's Witnesses, to a series of doctrinal debates and converting them to Orthodox Christians. In Cloud Burning, he writes, "The most fierce battle against heresy is that of the Unification Society. Between 1966 and 1983, more than 90 people from Hokkaido to Kyushu received counseling. I asked 3 or 4 of my parents, siblings, etc., to keep an eye on me so that I could not escape." Moriyama did not recommend this kind of physical persuasion to his family from the beginning. There was a time when one-on-one doctrinal debates were successful, but they seem to have become increasingly difficult. Although he seemed to be convinced that day, when his parents brought him back a few days later, he had returned to being an original believer, perhaps because he had been persuaded by a senior believer. From this bitter experience, he devised a method of persuading people under confinement so that they would not be influenced by the Unification Church. Moriyama's method was gradually passed on to other evangelical pastors. In March 1976, the Christian newspaper, an evangelical newspaper, reported that a group called the Resurrection Waiting for Comrade Association held a 3-day seminar on dealing with problems in the Unification Church period. At the seminar, 47 people gathered from all over the country and received instruction from Reverend Moriyama. Moriyama's students would soon be practicing protection persuasion all over the country. On the other hand, the United Church of Christ in Japan, to which pastors Curatori and Shimizu belong, has taken up the issue of the Unification Church period. At the general meeting in November 1986, the church issued a statement against the Unification Church and set up counseling centers in 16 dioceses, currently 17 dioceses across the country, to respond to family counseling needs. Makoto Sugimoto of Nishio Church, Okazaki City, Oichi Prefecture, who suddenly became famous for having Hiroko Yamazaki leave the church, reported the following at the Japan Decult Study Group Seinexini. The Japan Decult Association, in 1997, are doing hash out of the nearly 3,000 pastors who belong to the United Church of Christ, I think there are about 200 who have had some involvement in rescue efforts. Evangelicalism and the United Church of Christ in Japan are both Protestants, but while the former has strong biblical fundamentalist tendencies, the latter does not adhere to every word of the Bible, and many churches take a liberal stance. In addition, their stance on Unification Church members after leaving the church is different, with the former seeing leaving the church saving believers as part of evangelism, and being proactive in converting true Christians. In fact, Takazawa, an evangelical, did not shy away from his testimony at trial, saying, "Of the 100 members of my church, half are former members of the Unification Church." Despite these differences, since the late 1980s, when pastors from various Protestant denominations began to engage in systematic efforts, protective persuasion has been carried out on a nationwide scale, and many Unification Church members' suddenly disappearances have become a frequent occurrence.